Hello, everybody. Welcome back to OMB Reviews. I am the critic who is a cynic. Hope we're doing well. And today we're doing a box office preview for this upcoming weekend, which sees Captain America Brave New World once again take the #1 spot. However, it is expected to have a massive week 2 drop. This is after having a very poor performance during this past week, where it continues to track behind Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, which again shows us that this film likely will not be able to get much further past $450 million worldwide by the end of its run. Now, this of course is assuming that the internationals perform in a very similar way, but as of right now, the fact that it's tracking so far behind where Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania was at the same point of release shows us that, for one, Captain America and Captain America Brave New World may not get to $200 million domestic and has a very, very, very poor chance of getting anywhere close to being over $500 million, even if you were to assume that $180 million production budget, which is a complete farce. And if you want more information about that, check out my article over on geeksandgamers.com, where I break down why it is something that is just not based in reality, how you can look to the past reporting of budgets from Disney, and how every single time they reported, or every single time there was a report about an MCU film, it was always underreported by well over $100 million. Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania being a great example. That film shot in the UK, so we actually got tax returns that we could actually verify information and find out the truth behind how much they actually spent, right? The reporting initially was $200 million for that movie. Guess what? Ended up costing $330 million, and that was after your tax incentives. And so Disney has a past of being able to put out false numbers to the trades and really overspending compared to those numbers. And so that's why, again, that $180 million number that's being put out there really just cannot be believed by any means. It's again, I think, a bit silly for anyone to have any sense of credibility, or think they have any sense of credibility, and just to assume that that number is actually correct based off of the history that we know. Publicly available information, by the way, of what they've actually spent on other films before. Now, we're not going to be able to get that type of tax release in this case, because whereas several of their movies were shot in the United Kingdom, where they were forced to have these numbers put out there, and we were able to find out the truth thanks to the reporting of people like Caroline Reed over at Forbes, this movie was shot in Georgia. This movie was shot in the United States for the most part, and so therefore we're not going to be able to get those same types of disclosures. But what we do have in front of us is a situation where that week 2 drop-off, which is always, again, key to understanding whether a film will be successful or not, is expected to be one of the highest in the MCU, at least according to a couple of these box office sites. Let's just go ahead and dive into these numbers. We also have a new film from Neon called The Monkey, so we'll talk a little bit about what that film looks like as well, but most of it, of course, is going to be focused on Captain America. So as you can see, Box Office Theory is right now projecting the film is going to drop around 68%. Keep in mind, the only competition for this movie this weekend is The Monkey, which is not your typical movie that's going to be in that top discussion, but it's also not the type of movie that's going to take away much of the audience, or the potential audience, of Captain America Brave New World. And so what this is telling us is that, again, most people, just like most MCU films, went to see the film opening weekend, and now we're not seeing that much more coming after the fact. And so this is, again, the standard state for most MCU films. And so when a film opens as poorly as this did, and it did indeed open poorly, the spin on this movie is that, well, it opened to $100 million domestic, and so therefore it is a huge success. Well, yeah, it's open to $100 million domestic when you only take into account the 4-day total and not the 3-day total for the holiday weekend. So that's a big factor. And then also it only reaches $100 million. That's, again, much less than the much higher number that was made by Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. Quantumania made an extra $20-30 million in comparison to Brave New World's domestic, and that film only came out a couple years ago. That film also came out over the same exact weekend, and that's why that's a great film to be putting up against this one. So as of right now, it's looking like Captain America Brave New World is going to have a massive drop-off, and is likely going to be, we're going to be able to project this film to be a massive and catastrophic failure for Disney and the MCU. Now, I know there's a lot of MCU stands out there that just don't want to accept the reality of the situation about how poorly this movie is doing. And again, a lot of it also because people don't understand how the box office works. So for one, studios do not get 100% of their receipts. So anyone out there saying, well, it's made $204 million worldwide and it only cost $180 million, that means it's made made money. No, again, it doesn't get 100% of that $204 million. In fact, it only gets about 55% of that number from the domestic pile, and then only gets about 40% from the international pile. So the reality of the situation is actually very, very grim right now for Brave New World. And again, I call balls and strikes here. If this film was doing better than expected, I would be calling that. I mean, I did the same thing for Mufasa, right? Everyone in the world was saying Mufasa's not doing well and Mufasa's, going to fall off a cliff. And I called out the fact that no, actually by week 2, it actually had recovered and had been doing well every week after that and did so much better than anyone would have expected. I wouldn't call that film a huge financial success by any means, right? Because again, when it comes to these budgets, Disney is not always very honest about those numbers, and they do tend to spend a lot more on marketing than typical other movies do spend. But the fact that the film did better than expected, no one else was really talking about that in this space. I was. You also, of course, have to bring into the fact that Moana, right? When that movie came out, there were some in our space who were saying Moana was a failure. Moana was going to flop. The Moana was not going to get to $1 billion. And from the very beginning, I said, no, this film right now is tracking very well, and it's going to likely get to $1 billion. And sure enough, it got to $1 billion. So for the MCU stands out there that think that I'm just a complete anti-Disney person, again, I'm very critical of Disney for very good reason, but I'm also someone that always just sticks with the numbers and the data. And right now, a 68% drop being projected is really, really bad. Going on to The Monkey from Neon, $14.3 million for that film. Again, for a horror film, independent type movie. From Neon, that's a pretty good number there, so we'll see exactly how well or not it does. I've heard some mixed things about The Monkey, and again, not really my genre of films, but again, $14.3 million for a movie like that is definitely a good sign. Paddington in Peru expected to drop only 42%, so a pretty strong hold there for Paddington. I mentioned before that it has a long road ahead. It has a lot of money still to make up. Most of the money from the internationals has already been baked into the pie, and so projecting this movie is going to be very difficult, but we will be able to continue to track to see how successful this film is down the road. And so I'm hoping that Paddington is able to kind of pick up from there. Paddington is just a very good franchise, in general. I have not seen this third one yet, but I've heard good things. Basically, if you like the other two, you'll like this one as well. And so I'm very excited to eventually see this film. And I know that my son also very excited to see this film as well. So this, again, very much a family movie, and family films can tend to have that long range, that good legs down the line, especially with very little competition in the space. Dogman, which is a very mediocre film for kids, I would say it's a decent movie, a decent score for me over on Critic List. 38% drop there, so this film is still also holding quite well there. And there's a bunch of other films on this list that are still around, Mufasa included, still making millions of dollars over a given weekend. Again, once again showing Mufasa's holds a lot better than people had expected. Going over to Box Office Pro, they are projecting the film to make between $37 and $44 million. So they are actually the most bullish on the movie. They're thinking this film is going to make a lot more in comparison to some of the other box office sites. And so if it's a 68% drop with Captain America at $28.5 million over on Box Office Theory, having the low number be 37 means that they're expecting it to be probably closer to 50% range, so 50-55% or so. I again think that's a bit optimistic there. I don't think that there's a lot of there, especially when you look to the daily reporting of the movie. The movie's just not been doing well, and the fact that it's tracking daily behind where Quantumania is, it means if that tracking continues to track behind Quantumania had one of the largest drops in the entire history of the MCU, especially in modern history. So again, if the film's tracking behind that in daily numbers, we can assume that that same type of drop will happen in the weekend. That's probably why Box Office Theory is right now projecting around a 68% drop. Box Office Report as well projecting a 66% drop. For them, they think the film will probably get closer to around $30 million for the weekend. Either way, though, whether it's 66%, 68%, 70%, 65 plus, right? If it's in that 60% range, right, again, that is typical fare for MCU movies, but also it would mean that the film likely would still be tracking behind Quantumania. So if the film is able to turn around this weekend and start to do better than Quantumania, and that trend continues long after, okay, then we can start talking about the film doing better than expected. But as of right now, with where it is currently tracking and the fact that Quantumania barely did less than $450 million worldwide. Right now, that means that this movie not likely going to get that much past $400 million worldwide. Again, never say never. Internationals can be a whole other animal, especially if you have any type of delayed release model, but it's not looking good no matter what anyone might try to argue. Going over to the charts, because we love charts here on OMB Reviews, just to give perspective on how poorly this movie is actually doing. So again, this movie definitely cost at least $300 million to make. We know this not only from the reporting from World of Real, but even if you doubt their sources or doubt their information, we know as a fact that Disney underreports their numbers. We know as a fact that they, again, when it came to Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, that film had been reportedly costing only $200 million. When we got the truth of the matter, it was $130 million more than what they had reported, and that was after the tax incentives, which means they spent even more money, but they got a lot of money back from the United Kingdom. If you're going to look and compare these two movies together and think to yourself, wow, yeah, there's no way that, Brave New World cost anything less than Quantumania, I mean, I'm sorry, like, I don't know what you're looking at. You're not being honest with yourself. But even for a second, if you assume that this number is actually $180 million, let's go ahead and just for the sake of argument, 1, 2, 3, put that number in there. You still have a break even of, again, old school break even of 450, more realistic. The fact that this film, right, is making a lot of money internationally as well, that means your break even's closer to 3 times the budget, which means, again, closer to $540 million as a break even point. And that's why right now that would put the film at around $170 million in the red. So even if you assume this lower number, which is kind of ridiculous on the surface, it's still, again, expected to be a pretty massive flop for the studio. Again, much more realistic is the fact that it likely costs closer to $300 million, and that's why the break even closer to $900 million with that 3 times multiplier instead, which is why right now it's $350 million in the red. Do not be surprised to see this film be a $300 million loss, or at the best case scenario, a $250 million loss based on the numbers that we have available to us. And so again, I don't know what information people are looking at. I don't know what else we can say to really try to make the point that their number that's being reported out there is just completely false, and there's just no reason to suggest that we should trust the number given by Disney or by the trades, because they've been wrong every single time before, especially when these movies have been, in the UK. It's very fascinating, of course, that there's so much defense of this number. There's so much defense of this movie when they're not going to be able to be exposed like they have in the past. I imagine if this film had been shot in the United Kingdom, you probably wouldn't be hearing nearly as much push from the trades, nearly as much push from the people like Tony over at Deadline or the MCU stands about how this film actually is a huge success, and don't believe your lying eyes situation, because again, everything that we have in front of us indicates this movie is not doing very well at all. And I suspect that by the end of this weekend, I'll be able to make official projections that this film will be a massive, catastrophic failure. So what are your thoughts on the movie? Do you think the film is going to drop 68%? 66%, or do you think it's going to perform better than that? Again, very little competition this weekend, so you could theoretically see the film do a lot better, since people in general, movie habits were broken by COVID, but you do have some people that still try to go to the movies every single weekend. So what do you think is going to happen there? And just your general thoughts on that. Have you seen The Monkey? Thoughts on that movie, as that is the new release of this weekend, or any of the other films we talked about today? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. If you like this video, smash that like button, a lot of that fire button over on Odyssey, smash the button as well. You guys are all amazing and beautiful. Have a wonderful rest of your day, a blessed Friday, and as always, God bless. Now for a huge special shout out to all of my Chosen of Valhalla members, starting off first with my people on Patreon, Father Luca Illich and Miss Martin Muses. Check out her YouTube channel by the same name, Miss Martin Muses. Also to my Subscribestar people, Matt317, check out his Twitch channel by the same name, Matt317. And lastly to my YouTube member, Mr. Roy, shout out to you, good sir. And if you want your name shouted out at the end of every live stream and video, check out the top link in the video description below where you get access to that. Also, you get access to a plethora of other things. You get your name listed at the end of every live stream and video, like you saw in those names that came up before this video started. And also access to a giveaways channel that I host over on the Discord server where I give away 4Ks, Steelbooks, Blu-rays, all kinds of stuff. So check that out if you're interested in that. Also, I have an exclusive podcast that I hold at least once a month, and it's always a good time, and you get extra bonus content with that also. So if any of that sounds interesting, again, check out that top link in the video description below. You guys are all amazing, and beautiful people. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and as always, God bless.